Hi, and welcome to today's weekly news currents. Today is Wednesday, November 20th, 2024. Is it okay to keep reheating leftovers? Honest questions about food safety, illustrated. With all cooking, feasting, and leftover keeping that comes with holidays, it can be hard to know how to keep food safe. Sometimes we just do what our families did growing up, like storing rice in the rice cooker all day. Sometimes we follow what feels like common sense. If it looks and smells alright, it should be okay to eat, right? But experts urge a little more caution. Francine Shaw, a food safety specialist, and Naman J. Bumpus, a principal deputy commissioner, about the Food and Drug Administrator, answered 6 honest questions about food prep and safe food handling. If you want to avoid giving your guests and yourself food poisoning this season, follow their advice. How real is the 5-second rule? I've been following it since I was a kid. Sorry to break it to you, but there's no 5-second rule, says Naman, Principal Deputy Commissioner at the Food and Drug Administration. If you drop a pretzel on the ground and there's bacteria on the ground, they're going to get on your food. They're not going to wait for 5 seconds and sprint over, says Bumpus. My mom says I need to wash raw chicken before cooking it. Is that true? Do not wash your poultry or any meat. You're gonna cook it and kill the bacteria anyway, says Francine Shaw, certified professional in food safety. She never listens to me. If you wash your meat, you might be doing more harm than good. The bacteria on the outside of the meat is being splashed all over your kitchen and any other food you might have sitting around, she says. Is it okay to eat this leftover pizza? I bought it a week ago. It looks and smells alright. Toss it. Food typically lasts 3 to 4 days in the fridge, according to the Department of Agriculture. Past that time frame, bacteria can begin to grow rapidly. Even if your food seems fine, you can't see, smell, or taste all the bacteria that can kill you, says Shaw. Unless, of course, you happen to reheat it 3 or 4 days ago. More on that next. Wait, there's a leftover loophole? Tell me more. This is my 3rd time heating up this tuna casserole. Am I going to get explosive diarrhea? Some people think you can only reheat a leftover once, but actually, you can reheat it multiple times, says Bumpus. 3rd time's a charm. And get this, each time you reheat it, I'll keep in the fridge for another 3 to 4 days, she says. So you're saying this tuna casserole could feed me for a whole month? Did you catch that? As long as you're safely reheating your food for leftovers, that's 165 degrees Fahrenheit, the clock starts over every time. I'm not sure how I feel about another night of casserole. Maybe I'll freeze the rest. Keep in mind, reheating food over and over may have effect on its quality and texture. My mom leaves pots of food on the stovetop and rice in the rice cooker all day. That's fine, right? Definitely not, say Bumpus and Shaw. Don't leave any food out at room temperature for more than 2 hours. And if it's over 90 degrees Fahrenheit outside, no longer than 1 hour, they say. Wait, what about dinner picnics and dinner parties? You're telling me I can't eat from a charcuterie board at 9 p.m. if it's been sitting out since 7? Yes, that's a non-negotiable for me, says Shaw. Expiration dates, sell-by dates, and use-by dates. How seriously should we take them? Please throw out food if it's expired, says our experts. But when it comes to use by and sell by dates, those are more guidelines for nutrition and freshness. You can still use it, says Shaw. If something in your fridge or pantry is past its sell by date, check for signs of spoilage. If it's holding up, there's no need to immediately chuck it in the bin. Changes in texture, unpleasant odor, discoloration. So your kid wants to quit soccer, or piano, or swim class. Should you let them? My 4-year-old dreads swimming lessons. Some nights, long past his bedtime, he calls me to his room and asks me in a whisper if he has to go to swim class tomorrow. It breaks my heart. Swimming is an important safety skill, but the lessons are causing him anxiety. It makes me wonder, if he wants to quit, should I let him? It can be hard for parents to know when a kid is ready to stop taking part in an extracurricular activity. Classes and sports can encourage grit and foster belonging, but for some kids, they can also be stress-inducing obligation. Vanessa Lapointe, a child psychologist and parenting coach, understands this dilemma. In this situation, the best thing to do is avoid rushing to fix the problem. Instead, get curious, listen, and provide the child the experience of being heard. Here's how to have hard conversations with your kids about quitting. Apply the advance to anything from piano lessons to summer camp. Examine why you care so much. The problem might be you. When your child says they're ready to put their clarinet back in its case and leave it there, the first thing you do is examine yourself. If your kid wanting to quit elicits a strong reaction in you, unpack that. A lot of times our intentions get muddled by your own desires, says Lapointe. Are you trying to push your unrealized dream of starring in the school play onto your child? Or maybe your family couldn't swim team sports when you were growing up, so you're determined your child will have a different experience. If your intention is anything other than, I want to give my kid a cool experience and see how they like it, you're probably in it for the wrong reasons, says Lapointe. Ask your kid what's going on. You might be surprised by what you learn. See what they verbalize, says Crystal Lewis, a child psychologist and clinical researcher at the National Institute of Mental Health. Maybe they just had a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. The rule of thumb is that we never quit on a bad day, says Lapointe. So if you learn your kid got a smaller role than they wanted in the big school play, let their big emotions settle a bit before making any decisions. It's not just defeat from a bad day. Do a little more digging, says Lewis. Ask them, what do you like about the activity? What don't you like? Sometimes the true issue turns out to be simple. I don't like soccer because it's at the end of the long school day and they're hungry at practice, says Lewis. So maybe packing a protein-rich snack could make a difference. Even if the issue turns out to be more complex, they say, don't feel excited or passionate about art class. You now have valuable information to inform your troubleshooting. Pay attention to what your child is complaining about and observe their behavior. The younger the child is, the less likely they were able to express their emotions or experiences verbally, says Lewis. So you may need other cues to figure out how your child feels. Pay attention to your child when they're complaining, says Lewis. Maybe they're sensitive to a coach's raised voice, or they're too shy to talk to the other kids. Those issues you can help fix. Have a conversation with the coach. Encourage a friend to join the team. If you're present at your child's practices or lessons, you might be able to pick up some of the pain points, says Lewis. If they're zoning out, maybe they're burnt out and need more unstructured playtime. If they seem bored, it's possible this activity just isn't for them. Consider your child's temperament. Are they a dandelion or an orchid? Every child has different tolerance for discomfort, and that should be taken into consideration when making a decision about quitting. Assess their willingness to thrive in a challenging environment. Are they a dandelion or an orchid? This framework is determined by Thomas Bryce. Are they a professor of pediatrics and psychiatry at the University of California, San Francisco, to help identify a child's temperament? Dandelions are hardy and resilient. You can plant it in a crack in the cement and forget to water it. And not only will the dandelion survive, it will probably thrive, says LaPointe. Orchids are sensitive. They require just the right amount of water, humidity, and temperature. If you don't get it just right, they don't adapt. One is better than the other. One isn't better than the other. They're just different. See which flower your child leans towards more. If your kid is more of a dandelion, they may be okay in a less than perfect setting, even if they're not jazzed about it. They're more of an orchid, and so they're really struggling. Maybe they need a different environment. Come up with a creative compromise. Quit or tough it out aren't the only two options. What's the gray area? What can we modify, says Lewis. If your kid is bored, could you take a break or cut back on the amount they're engaging in the activity? If your kid is embarrassed when they strike out, could you practice batting at home? They have a conversation with your child, what it means to have made a commitment. Perhaps you say, well, since you signed up, we're going to go. But you can sit on the sidelines and watch, says Lewis. That way, you're teaching the child about honoring a commitment without forcing them to do something that's really uncomfortable. As for my son and his fear of swim class, my husband and I did some investigating. We asked him what was up. It turns out he was terrified of putting his head underwater. So we talked to the coach, and they agreed he didn't have to go under during class. Of course, you need to get your head wet to swim. My son eventually overcame his fear a few months later, when we were playing in the pool with his cousins. Now he routinely dunks himself during swim class. He literally takes his hand, puts it on the back of his head, and pushes himself underwater. And he loves being in the water. Turns out all he needed was a little time. Even if we ended up needing to take a break from swimming for a while, I think I would have been okay with that too. LaPointe says that we as parents shouldn't put too much pressure on ourselves in situations like these. In the grand scheme of things, this isn't actually a big thing. Women stock up on abortion pills, Plan B, fearing new restrictions under Trump. As millions of Americans were waking up last Wednesday morning to learn that Donald Trump won the presidency, it dawned on Dr. Angel Foster that she was about to be very busy. Foster is co-founder of the Massachusetts Medication Abortion Access Project, or the MAP, a telehealth provider that sends abortion medication through the mail to patients across the U.S., including states where it's illegal. On a typical day, Foster says between 130 and 140 people fill out the organization's intake form. But the day following the presidential election, there were more than 1,000. It has been a very, very challenging couple of days for our team, says Foster, adding that many of these patients are not pregnant, but instead are buying the medication for future use. The MAP is one of the several telehealth abortion providers seeing an influx of requests. Last week, Aid Access, Hey Jane, and WISP all told the NPR they had surges in orders of abortion pills. Though President-elect Trump has promised to veto any federal abortion ban, he can still wield the powers of the executive branch to curtail access. And because the majority of abortions in the U.S. are done via a 2-pill regimen that essentially causes a miscarriage, any efforts to limit abortion care will likely target these medications. It's understandable that people are afraid right now. Based on what happened in the first Trump administration, says Brittany Fonteno, president of the National Abortion Federation, an organization that represents doctors and clinics that provide abortions. We can expect that a second Trump administration without the guardrails, without the protection of Roe v. Wade, could be even more devastating for abortion rights and access, says Fonteno. For example, it's possible that Trump could prohibit telehealth abortion, or he might implement restrictions on the prescribing of mailing of abortion pills, because the Supreme Court's conservative majority, regulatory changes stand a better chance of weathering legal challenges. When he was last in office, Trump appointed 3 justices to the Supreme Court, including for the vacancy left by the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a champion of abortion rights. This led to the overturning of Roe v. Wade and ended the constitutional right to abortion in 2022. Any changes to federal abortion policy will likely occur through the Department of Justice or the Department of Health and Human Services. Trump's selections can lead to these departments having clashing stances on abortion. Trump has said he'll nominate Florida Representative Matt Gaetz to be the next Attorney General. Gaetz opposes abortion. If confirmed, he'll decide how to enforce laws, including the Comstock Act, a dormant anti-obscenity law from the 1800s that could be used to ban abortions nationwide. In contrast, Trump wants Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who supports abortion rights, to be his Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. This department oversees the Food and Drug Administration, which governs rules around abortion medication, like whether pills can be sent in the mail or prescribed via telehealth. This issue is particularly critical because the Biden administration loosened rules around prescribing and dispensing abortion medications, expanding across telehealth care. The policy change has especially benefited people in communities that lack access to abortion care. In fact, nearly 1 out of 5 abortions in the U.S. are done via telehealth. Between 2020 and 2023, the number of abortions in the U.S. grew by 11%, according to the Guttmacher Institute, a think tank that supports abortion rights. The pro-life movement has a lot of work ahead of us, says Kelsey Pritchard with Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America, a powerful anti-abortion lobby. The group has said they are focused on dismantling policies of the Biden-Harris administration. Students for Life of America's legislative agenda includes passing state and federal laws limiting access to abortion pills, which they call a chemical abortion. They say they have the support of many state legislators, as well as many Republican members of Congress. While the Trump administration will have many tools to restrict abortion access, the president-elect hasn't said exactly what he'll do or when he might do it. Legal experts say it's also not clear how challenges to any new regulations or laws will play out in the courts. In the meantime, patients are planning for a new era. In addition to an increased demand for abortion pills, Hey Jane and WISP also report spikes in requests for emergency contraception, which prevents sperm from fertilizing an egg. A similar thing happened after Roe was overturned, recalls WISP CEO Monica Sipak. I think you find these moments to be rallying call for women to take agency and more ownership over their health, Sipak says. A bomb cyclone is expected to hit Pacific Northwest. Here is what you should know. A powerful storm system known as a bomb cyclone is expected to hit northwestern states and the Pacific coast in the next few days, causing dangerous conditions, weather forecasters say. A low-pressure system out of the Pacific is expected to produce significant high wind impacts and heavy mountain snow across parts of the Washington state, Oregon, and Idaho, according to the National Weather Service. A strong atmospheric river storm will also hit Northern California by Wednesday. Rainfall and flooding that is life-threatening is also expected along the northwest coast late Tuesday through the rest of the week. The worst part of the storm will occur Wednesday through Friday, as parts of the Northern California coast are at high risk of excessive rainfall, with areas receiving 10 to 15 inches in a 48-hour period. Heavy rain and rising snow levels will increase the threat of numerous floods and potential mudslides, exacerbated by the duration of heavy rainfall through the end of the week. The NWS Weather Prediction Center said Tuesday. Parts of the region will also receive heavy and wet snow, with mountain areas in the northwest seeing 2 to 3 inches of snow accumulate per hour Wednesday and Thursday, with several feet of snow at high elevations. There will also be whiteout conditions with 65 mile-per-hour wind gusts that will lead to near impossible travel, especially at pass level in the Cascades and Northern California, the NWS also warns. Expected wind gusts topping 60 miles per hour will also lead to downed trees and power outages, as well as a potentially damaging high turf that will impact the coastline. Blizzards and high wind warnings are also in effect for portions of Washington, including the Seattle area. What is a bomb cyclone? A bombogenesis, or what is commonly known as a bomb cyclone, is a mid-latitude between the tropics and polar regions. What is a bomb cyclone? A bombogenesis, or what is commonly known as a bomb cyclone, is a mid-latitude between the tropics and polar regions. Cyclone that rapidly intensifies over a 24-hour period when atmospheric pressure drops significantly by at least 24 millibars. According to the National Ocean Service, this occurs when cold and warm air masses collide. The pressure in the storm system impacting the Pacific Northwest is expected to continue to drop. Brian Hurley, senior meteorologist at the NWS Weather Prediction Center, told NPR on Tuesday. This morning, it was at 981 millibars, and by the time we get to this evening, it looks like it could be 946 millibars, Hurley said. That's 35 millibars in 12 hours, and that definitely meets the criteria of 24 millibars in 24 hours in terms of the pressure drop. Take precautions now. The NWS Seattle office on Monday urged residents to take precautions now to ensure you and your family stay safe, ahead of the oncoming strong winds, including checking emergency kits, repairing shutters, and trimming trees. The agency also noted that the safest place is inside in an interior room and away from windows. The Oregon State Fire Marshal on Monday advised residents to stay safe, charge their electronic devices, and if power is lost, use a flashlight instead of candles, and to avoid using generators indoors. California's emergency services also cautioned residents to be prepared and make an emergency plan and sign up for emergency alerts. Philadelphia criticized for how it's spending millions from opioid lawsuits. Ever since moving in 5 years ago, Tiffany has been unable to open her house's windows. The sills were rotting from water damage, and opening them posed a hazard. The front windows have to be screwed shut because they'll literally fall in on you, she said in August. But she couldn't afford to replace them. It would be really nice to just open the windows and have a breeze, instead of having 10 fans going. Tiffany got her wish in September. Contractors came and installed 6 new windows, free. The repairs were part of the project funded by opioid settlement dollars. Local governments are starting to receive those funds from drug manufacturers and distributors, following a 2021 lawsuit over the pharmaceutical industry's role in fueling the opioid crisis. NPR is identifying Tiffany by her first name only because she's worried about becoming a target of theft. She lives in Kensington, one of Philadelphia's poorest neighborhoods, and the hardest hit by the city's opioid crisis. The $1 billion open-air drug market in Kensington has been dubbed the largest on the East Coast. Philadelphia received $20 million in settlement funds in 2023. Over a third of that pot, $7.5 million, was set aside specifically for Kensington and divided into 5 buckets for parks, schools, home repairs, rent relief, and support for small businesses. Upgrades and investments in these areas will improve the lives of Kensington families and children, according to community leaders and residents. It is a step towards repair. After years of coping with the fallout from drug use, overdoses, and crime, they say. Photographs of individuals who died from overdose are displayed outside Huntington Station in the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia during International Overdose Awareness Day on August 29th. But not everybody agrees with how the city is using that money. On June 20th, the Pennsylvania Opioid Misuse and Addiction Abatement Trust, an independent body that oversees how local governments use opioid settlement dollars, voted that all the Kensington spending did not comply with federal guidelines. This board is very cognizant of the problems besetting, particularly the Kensington area, said Trust Chair Thomas Van Kirk in June. However, we believe that the programs that were outlined in the use of opioid money was inappropriate. It does not comply with Exhibit E. Exhibit E was created as part of the lawsuit settlement. It's a list of approved but not required spending categories. It includes purchases of opioid reversal medications such as naloxone and of medications that treat opioid addiction such as bupropion. Other approved uses include recovery services, clean syringe exchanges, and addiction treatment focused on pregnant women and those in jail or prison. The dispute reveals differing philosophies over how to use the money. As of 2019, the ongoing opioid epidemic has killed more than 500,000 people since 1999, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Some want a stricter interpretation of the national guidelines, but others argue that addressing the root causes of addiction, such as local poverty and neglect, will help prevent future cycles of drug use and help affected neighborhoods rebuild. In this initial decision, the Pennsylvania Trust voted that much of the community investment spending in Kensington was non-compliant, but did approve outlays for its overdose response unit, a city department focused on the epidemic, and nonprofits that address housing and treatment services for people with substance use disorder. A local resident helps outreach worker Thomas Bradley on the right during cleanup event in Philadelphia's Kensington neighborhood. Bradley works with Ride Free, a local nonprofit focused on gun violence and neighborhood resilience. Philadelphia officials decided to appeal the decision, and on October 3rd, the trust issued a partial reversal. It ruled funding for Kensington schools, parks, and rent and mortgage relief was compliant with federal guidelines. But the board maintained that $3.4 million in funding for home repairs like Tiffany's, as well as support for small businesses, was non-compliant. On November 4th, the city filed a challenge with the Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania, arguing the trust ruling used an impermissibly narrow reading of Exhibit E. If the trust ruling stand, it could mean that next year the trust could reduce or withhold additional settlement funds from Philadelphia. Addressing the indirect impacts of addiction. Tiffany was just one of 400 Kensington homes that will be repaired with settlement funds. In addition, 250 families will receive mortgage or rental support, distributed by the nonprofit New Kensington Development Corporation, according to the executive director, Bill McKinney. McKinney disagreed with the trust's decision on housing. The settlement money should go to people living with addiction and those living around it, he and other advocates say. That can't be how this story ends. This is one of those opportunities to actually stabilize some of these places, McKinney says. Darlene Burton has lived in Kensington for 28 years. She's slated to get her leaky roof repaired. Residents of Kensington need to uplift of these financial investments from the city, Burton said. After years of coming outside every day and seeing people slumped over after injecting drugs, we're truly traumatized by what we see on a daily basis. Help us. Invest in us. The 6 schools in Kensington have seen massive drops in enrollment, especially when compared to district-wide data. Leaders at these schools will use their designated funds on things like new playgrounds, a drum line, student uniforms, crossing guards, a freezer for food, donations to families, and new career counselors and climate specialists. A band-aid to an open chest wound. For these school teachers, this funding is a drop in the bucket, especially within a historically underfunded school district. Willard Elementary will install its first playground and purchase new fencing made with material that will make it more difficult for bullets to pass through. Willard is number 3 on the list of schools with the most nearby shootings in the U.S., according to The Trace. 4 other Kensington schools are at the top 10. Gloria Caceres Elementary School is expanding its playground and building a sensory wellness room, a place designed to calm kids who are exposed to trauma and chronic stress, and students with sensory processing issues from ADHD and autism. While walking to and from school, many of the SARS students encounter human feces and used needles on the sidewalks, said Principal Awilda. She expressed concern that her students might be stepping over people that they think are dead on the street due to overdoses. The spending is about their students' human rights, according to both Balbuena and Garcia. 30 minutes a day in clean playground, that would be something every child in the city can do, Garcia said. But these fixes are the least city officials can do, and won't erase what the kids have already seen growing up inside the epidemic, Balbuena said. I hope no one thinks for 1 minute that the $2 million that was awarded to the 6 schools is going to, for 1 minute, erase what our kids have seen during this opioid epidemic, Balbuena said. This is a band-aid to an open chest wound. Neighboring leaders also funneled some of the $7.5 million into 5 local parks. After surveying residents on how the money should be used. At Scanlon Recreation Center, over half the people surveyed requested a curling club at the park's ice rink, said Aaron Farrell, a resident who works for the local nonprofit Impact Services. Farrell helped the parks figure out how to spend money. So the rec center Scanlon used the money to buy curling gear. So imagine we could have an Olympic champion come right out of here, Farrell said. State board flexes its oversight muscles. The PA Opioid Misuse and Addiction Abatement Trust is a 13-member board made up of state lawmakers, county health commissioners, mayoral staff members, and alcohol and drug treatment program administrators. 2 state senators who sit on the trust recently traveled to Kensington for a tour of the neighborhood. Senator Gregory Rothman and Senator Christine Targaline, who represents Philadelphia, initially voted the Kensington spending non-compliant. In Kensington, Rothman said that before he visited, he didn't know children were experiencing the impacts of the opioid crisis in the neighborhood. If you had asked me this morning how many kids live in Kensington, I would have said, there are no kids in Kensington. After the walk, Rothman said that he would be thinking differently about the situation. It was really eye-opening and scary, he said to the tour through Kensington. I understand the effect of the opioid crisis has had on the victims and the families, Rothman added. But you don't think about the effects it has on communities and neighborhoods like this. He said his initial no vote in January was due to lack of knowledge about the need to fund community resources for children. I didn't know, he said. I feel differently. Rothman was not the one on the committee that heard Philadelphia's October 3rd appeal. Community leaders and residents argue that giving children safe places to learn and play is part of the preventing opioid misuse in the neighborhood. Studies show that having a parent with substance use disorder is one of the biggest factors for children developing these problems later in life, said Sarah Whaley, a researcher at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Exposure to a safe and trusting adult can help prevent the outcome, she said. Just a stable environment can really help kind of mitigate those risk factors, she said. And schools play a huge role in that. Whaley's team released the principles for the use of funds from the opioid litigation in 2021, recommending investments in both youth programming, harm reduction, and housing assistance. In other states, officials have not questioned similar spending. Some have allowed it for police cars and jail equipment. Helping families stay in their homes is actually crucial to long-term, cost-efficient solutions to the crisis, said Bill McKinney of DKCDC. Some people who sell drugs are doing it just to make rent, he explained. When you're not sure and you gotta hit that corner now because you got to make sure that your mom can stay in her house, that opens up a whole other can of worms, McKinney said. Those that are actually here understand that. Somebody from the middle of Pennsylvania who's never been to Kensington doesn't know what's going on and shouldn't have any input in what we do out here. During the appeal, city officials argued that Kensington residents and children are uniquely vulnerable to the risk of developing opioid use disorder. Home repairs help stabilize the lives of residents, and children are uniquely vulnerable. While small business support reduces the vacant buildings and increases economic opportunities, said Kelly McLeod, director of Philadelphia's Overdose Response Unit. Both strategies lower the chances of drug use and overdose. The oversupply and proliferation of opioid hit harder here than in any single neighborhood in the U.S., McLeod said. To dispute this fact is to deny the reality of the effects of the narcotics trade in the neighborhood, to deny the constant and inescapable trauma experienced by every Kensington resident, and to deny the incredibly well-documented relationship between trauma and risk of developing opioid use disorder. Philadelphia now awaits a response from the state on its appeal to get all of its spending approval. What the state decides, according to Hopkins researcher Sarah Whaley, could impact how jurisdictions across the country invest opioid settlements dollars, and whether they can direct some of those funds to schools, small businesses, housing, and green spaces. Biden marks his climate legacy during Amazon visit. President Biden tours the Museu da Amazônia, a rainforest preserve in Manaus, Brazil, on November 17, 2024, before heading to Rio de Janeiro for the G20 summit. Manaus, Brazil, President-elect Donald Trump has vowed to roll back President Biden's clean energy incentives when he takes office in January. But on Sunday, Biden used a trip to the Amazon to defiantly assert that his legacy for addressing climate change could not be easily reversed. Some may seek to deny or delay the clean energy revolution that's underway in America, but nobody can reverse it. Biden said in the remarks from the Rainforest Preserve. Biden is the first sitting U.S. president to visit the Amazon, a quick climate that was meant as a capstone for his work on climate, made between two summits he is attending in South America. He took an aerial tour of a region that has been through 2 years of drought and looked at areas where trees had been illegally harvested. Then he walked along a dirt path through the edge of the rainforest, meeting with indigenous leaders and Nobel laureate Dr. Carlos Nobre, who studies how climate change affects the Amazon. Noting that he is about to leave office, Biden checked off his climate accomplishments, noting that his clean energy investments could help the United States cut carbon emissions in half by 2030. I will leave my successor and my country the strong foundation to build on, if they choose to do so, he said, arguing that clean energy investments were helping create jobs. The question now is, which government will stand in the way and which will seize the enormous economic opportunity? Trump left the Paris Accord, Biden rejoined it. Now Trump is poised to quit again. On Biden's first day in office, he signed an order for the United States to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement to limit greenhouse gas emissions. Trump had withdrawn from the accord when he first took office in 2017, and he has promised to leave it again when he takes office in January. Trump has vowed to cut the Inflation Reduction Act, Biden's landmark climate legislation that contains the largest federal clean energy investment in U.S. history. The White House has been working to try to get funding, initiatives, and regulations on the books before Biden leaves, anticipating the changes ahead. On Sunday, Biden said he had fulfilled a pledge to increase international climate aid to $11 billion. He met with the officials from Mombach Gestora de Recursos, a company like Microsoft, which get carbon reduction emission credits in exchange. The U.S. government is giving Mombach a $37.5 million loan for its project. And he announced $50 million for Brazil's Amazon Fund, bringing the total U.S. contribution to $100 million. Biden last year had pledged $500 million to the fund over 5 years. Asked about the likelihood of incoming Trump administration fulfilling the rest of the pledge, senior U.S. officials told reporters traveling with Biden, "Who knows? Maybe he'll come down here and see the forest and see the damage being done from the drought and other things and change his mind about climate change."